Molly of Denali could lead to positive change in the average American's understanding of Native peoples.
But children's television programming in itself cannot affect all the necessary changes.
The American Religious Town Hall meeting is now in session.
Welcome, friends, to the American Religious Town Hall meeting, where the discussion of religious, political, and social issues is meant to promote the cause of religious freedom and to help us better understand each other. And now, here's your host and moderator, Pastor Jerry Lutz.
Thank you. I'm so very glad you've joined us for today's program. Looking forward to this discussion. We have a panel assembled here. You've only heard from two of them. You don't know who they are yet. And by all means, you might not know about Molly of Denali, but we're going to come to that. We'll get there in just a few moments. Let's have our panelists tell us who they are, a little bit about what they do. Let's start with the gentleman to my right.
Hi, I'm Carl Trovall. I'm the Richard J. Dinda Professor of Lutheran Identity and Mission at Concordia University in Austin, Texas.
My name is John Peterson. I am a canon in the Episcopal Church, and I am canonically resident in the Diocese of Washington.
My name is Bishop Michael Olson, and I currently serve as the Bishop of the Roman Catholic Diocese of Fort Worth, Texas.
I'm Dan Levin. I serve as Senior Rabbi at Temple Bethel in Boca Raton, Florida.
And my name is Mel Robeck. I'm an ordained minister with the Assemblies of God, and I serve my church as Senior Professor of Church History and Ecumenics and Special Assistant to the President for Ecumenical Relations at Fuller Theological Seminary in Pasadena, California.
Hi, I'm Tom Plumbley. I'm the Senior Minister at First Christian Church in Fort Worth, Texas. We're a part of the Christian Church Disciples of Christ.
Thank you, everyone, for being here today. As I said, looking forward to this discussion. So in the summer of 2019, the public broadcasting system began televising Molly of Denali. It's a children's program in cartoon format about an Alaska Native girl and her friends and family. Molly, whose parents run a trading post near Mount Denali, formerly Mount McKinley, deals with the everyday challenges of growing up, like tending a garden and saving money for a special purchase. But along the way, she and her friends learn about their history, heritage, and identity as members of three distinct nations indigenous to Alaska. In many ways, the show is the first of its kind in the history of television in the United States. It includes Native peoples at every stage of its production, including writing storylines and the voicing of some of its characters. The program presents Molly and those around her as everyday people, kids exploring, laughing, and learning, and adults as singers and dancers, storekeepers, pilots, retirees, and more, refusing to give in to the traditional stereotypes of savages, noble warriors, or people suffering with poverty and alcoholism. The show is giving voice to issues and people long ignored. Most of us must admit that we don't even have Native peoples on our radar. Now, this raises some significant questions for our religious groups, which by and large either ignore indigenous peoples, thoughtlessly use the old unfair stereotypes, or take their stories and use them for their own non-Native purposes. Do 21st century religious bodies have anything at all to say or to do in relation to this hemisphere's Native peoples? Well, that is going to be our discussion today, but I'd like for our panelists to consider these three questions with regard to what we're going to talk about. First of all, how might this children's program, as a bare beginning of contemporary representation of Native culture, affect Native self-understanding as well as non-Native understanding of the relationship between Natives and non-Natives? And secondly, what can churches and synagogues and mosques do to make right the injustices inflicted on Native peoples since the beginning of European settlement of the Americas? And then finally, can a single children's television program really do much to correct the general ignorance of the average non-Native American about Native identity, history, and contemporary life? Those are the questions of the subject I'd like our panelists to discuss today. Let's go back to those who helped to begin the program, those who made opening remarks. And so, Reverend Plumbley, glad to have you on the program. Tell us more of your thoughts on this subject.
Thank you. All I have to do is go back to my own childhood and remember that deep, resonant voice that would come on the television in the afternoons, and it would start with, "Look, up in the sky, it's a bird, it's a plane, it's Superman," and then you'd have music and you'd see Superman flying. It looked like his cape was going out, it had been blown out with a fan behind him, and it got down to where it was talking about Superman standing up for truth, justice, and the American way. And I remind myself that that's part of where I learned about what truth is, what justice is, and what the American way is. I also think, Davy Crockett, Captain Kangaroo, all the things from my own childhood. And I look at my grandchildren, and I think of not only the old programs from their point of view, like Sesame Street or Daniel Tiger, which is what's happened to Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood since Mr. Rogers died, but now Molly of Denali, and I am grateful for the opportunity that we're having to open ourselves up at this very young age to some people that have largely gone forgotten. We need to remember that values in the human spirit, in the human mind, are formed well before we get formal education. And therefore, these things that our children see in these early years of their lives are very important. I think of the importance of the Bill Cosby kids. Whatever you think of Bill Cosby now, in decades ago, Bill Cosby and Fat Albert and those cartoon characters played a great role in opening up a generation just younger than my own, my boy's generation, my son's generation, to African American people that was a very different understanding, a very different education about who African Americans are than I got as a child. And the same thing, I think, can happen now because of Molly of Denali about our native peoples that were in this land long before the rest of us pushed them away.
All right, thank you very much. And now, Bishop Olson, you also made an opening comment.
Oh, yes.
Please.
I think it's an educational show, and I think that's very important, and it's a start. I think one of the challenges and insights, I think, is that when we study cultures, I think cultures help us to identify what is different in groups, but it also helps us to identify what we have in common. And I think that always has to be, or would be beneficial if it would be the second step after differences. I think, especially with culture, I don't know how, and know that the attempt is often made, but I don't know how it can really be done thoroughly without looking at religion. That culture always ties and comes in closely with religious expression, religious understanding. And the next point is there is diversity within cultures and understandings, and I think that that if we listen to the voices of the indigenous population and nativists, we'll hear a diversity of voices. Some that have been harmed through an approach to evangelization that is strictly colonialist, and in others who have benefited and have an authentic expression of their religious experience tied to their culture as well. And I think there's so much more that needs to be done in this area so that we can move beyond just the old paradigms, whether it's a prejudice of extremes, of either a group of people without any problems, without any defects to their culture, or a group of people with nothing but a defect to their culture.
All right, thank you very much. Next to you is Dr. Robeck.
I've only seen 2 Molly of Denali shows, and one of them was about going to the dentist, and these kids that get scared of going to the dentist because one kid tells the story to another one, and they pass it along, and it gets worse and worse, and they all go hide until the dentist finds them and says, never trust a kid to talk about the dentist. Go to a dentist and let them tell you the truth. And I thought, no, that's a bad one. I don't buy that at all, And the other one that I saw was about a man who wore a very distinguished hat, very different kind of a hat. And the kids think he might be a spy, and so they keep working at trying to find out what's going on here, and they get a clue and a clue and a clue, and then they finally see his hat in a magazine, and it says that, or a book, and it says that it's a Mongolian hat, So you are introduced to a different culture in that particular thing, and it's an interesting little dialogue that goes on there. I didn't find it particularly entertaining, but kids might. But I did think it has potential for helping young people understand different cultures in a different way. When I was growing up, I watched my share of Superman, although TV was not something that was really evident in our home very much. But I listened to The Lone Ranger and Tonto, So Tonto's the sidekick, and he's always having to say, yes, Kemosabe, yes, Kemosabe. It's like he's always not really there. These people are invisible to us for the most part. The other one was the Cisco Kid with his sidekick, Pancho, Pancho Villa. And so, it's just like, where do they come up with these characters? Those were the days that were very different from our own. So we've been talking a lot in recent weeks on this show about people who are faceless, people who are invisible, people who are marginalized. And I think, in my experience, Native Americans, Indians, whatever they want to be called, or whatever we want to call them, are invisible people to us. I mean, I've heard the stories, but I know that growing up in my American history classes, we really, and I will say this very clearly, whitewashed the story of how we treated Native Americans. To me, there's a lot of shame in our history. Native Americans are the first, African Americans are the second, and we can go, Asian Americans are the third, it just goes on and on and on, how we've mistreated all these people. So I think this is a good idea. I think it's a helpful idea, and I hope kids will be encouraged to watch this kind of a show. I hope that we will develop more shows like this so that kids don't end up with the same kind of stereotypes that most of us have grown up with.
All right, thank you very much. And Canon Peterson, glad to have you here today.
Thank you.
Your thoughts, please.
I, too, when I learned about this program, went on and looked at 2 programs. I honestly cannot remember what I saw, but I certainly know that I was extremely impressed because they were giving voice to issues and people that have been long ignored. And I thought it was done extremely well. I did not see the dentist series, but I think that anything like this really is helpful in relationship to breaking down stereotypes. I think that there are 2 things I really want to say very briefly, is even to this very day, we are disenfranchising Native American people. One can only look at the last election that took place, and Native American people in North Dakota, the Supreme Court in North Dakota acted to disenfranchise them because Native American people do not have street addresses. They have post office boxes. And consequently, as a result, they did not allow them to vote unless they had a street address, which is just kind of unbelievable that the Supreme Court would take such a decision, which meant that thousands of people, they could not do it in time from the time the decision was made to the time of the election to be able to get everyone registered with a street address. And so how we have disenfranchised Native American people is incredible. Now, I want to say one more thing. The one church that I know of that has really taken a significant lead to make the injustice inflicted upon the Indigenous people of Canada is the Anglican Church. And the Anglican Church in Canada has a dreadful history in relationship to residential schools, etc., and the way in which the Native American, Native people in Canada were treated. And they have gone through an extremely difficult time, the church has, but they are now not only assisting the survivors, but really making recompense to the survivors. So the church in Canada deserves kudos for what they have done with a history that was not very happy.
Thank you. And next to you is Rabbi Levin, and glad to have you here. What is your thought on this subject, please?
So in Jewish mystical tradition, there's an idea that everything and everyone is covered with garments. And those garments serve in some ways to identify us, and in some ways to mask who we ultimately truly are. So even a Torah scroll wears a garment. But if you want to understand the Torah scroll, you've got to start peeling away those garments. So even the language itself, the Kabbalah teaches, is a garment to the essential truths that lie within. And I think so often we look at those outer shells, those garments, as if they are the essence, as opposed to that which encompasses the essence. And so I think if you think about how Native Americans are made to have those kinds of movie roles like you saw growing up, well, just look at how Native Americans are depicted in culture. They are, what remind us of sports teams, the Redskins, the Seminoles, the Chiefs, the Indians. They are those stereotypical warriors or lackluster minds that you saw in television. And so I think to be able to re-experience and realize the essential human condition that lies between us, even though there is difference, we need to see things that make us imagine things in different ways. And you sometimes cannot imagine that which you cannot see. And by providing this at the earliest ages of child development, it allows young people to realize that Native Americans are like any kind of Americans. They are essentially human, and they live their lives and are worthy of recognition and respect, as is anybody else.
All right, thank you very much. Now, Dr. Trovall, your thoughts, please.
This has been a wonderful discussion. I've appreciated everything everyone has said. And so what can I say other than my own experience growing up in Minnesota, having contact with Native Americans and or First Nation peoples. And I remember the stereotypes I encountered, and I remember one time my dad, we were talking about our neighbors, and my dad said, "Oh, no, Rosie's Native American." And I said, "Really?" Because all the stereotypes I had heard, here's a woman who's living her life that I thought, well, this seems like a normal life. But then I guess as a kid, I couldn't even process that. So, I couldn't agree with you more that normalizing how people really are and doing it at an early age is really, really wonderful, because it makes you think differently about the Native peoples and First Nations. I think the other piece here is that there are so many First Nations in the United States and Canada to learn about. I can't imagine how many programs we could write for children on all the different nations, because these are not one people. They are many peoples, many nations. And that would be a fascinating project all on its own.
And that's part of the stereotype as well. We tend to block them, put them in the groups, or a group, and say, that's it. And what you've just said, I think, is very important for us to recognize that all over North America, there are many nations.
Yeah, and I think our culture is hungry to learn about those nations. I find students, at least at the university level, they want to spend more time on the First Nations rather than going into the rest of American history.
Well, thank you. Just a few seconds left, and it's to you, Tom. Where did you become familiar with Molly of Denali?
Oh, my grandchildren watch it.
Ah, there it is.
See, the kids
All
are bringing
right.
the adults in.
That's right.
It's a good thing, too.
Indeed. Well, I'm afraid we're out of time for this segment, but thank you so much for tuning in. We look forward to hearing the summary statements in just a few moments, but before we go to those, we'd like for you to stand by and listen to a very important announcement. Now, the announcement has to do with the email address and the mailing address and all of that, but listen particularly regarding the Town Hall Estates. I'd encourage you to go to the website that Mark is going to introduce you to learn more about the Town Hall Estates. We'll be back in just a few moments.
Thank you, Pastor Lutz. We hope you are enjoying today's program. If you would like to learn more about the American Religious Town Hall, please visit our website at americanreligious.org. That's americanreligious.org. There you can read about the mission and history of the program, learn about the Town Hall Estates, and view past programs by clicking the appropriate menu buttons. Each week, Pastor Lutz looks forward to receiving your letters. You may write to him at the address shown on your screen. Send your letters to Pastor Jerry Lutz, American Religious Town Hall Meeting, P.O. Box 180118, Dallas, Texas 75218. That's Pastor Jerry Lutz, American Religious Town Hall Meeting, P.O. Box 180118, Dallas, Texas 75218. Thank you for writing, and thank you for watching. And now, back to you, Pastor Lutz, and today's closing statements.
Thank you, Mark. We are going to go to the closing statements, but again, I would like to encourage you to go to the website. The folk there at the Town Hall Estates are very caring, compassionate people with whom I'm sure you'd love to become familiar. So this is your way to do that, by going to the website and finding a little bit about the Town Hall Estates, and to also find that place where you can send us an email with your suggestions concerning programs you'd like to see here, subjects and topics that you would like to recommend that we discuss here. So thank you again for tuning in. Let's go to our summary statements now. Let's begin with Dr. Trovall. You're first.
You mentioned Superman at the very beginning. Superman, I know the community can't solve their problems, and so some individual comes flying in to save everyone. And it's so American, isn't it, that we can just trust one individual to solve all of our problems rather than us buckling under and doing everything. That was a completely separate topic apart from this, but I kept thinking about that. I think the second question, what can churches, synagogues, mosques do to right the injustices? I think that's the wrong question. I think we need to ask the native peoples themselves, what is it that you need from us?
All right. Thank you very much. Bishop Olson, your summary, please.
This has been a very good discussion. I really appreciated it for more reflection on the phenomena of peoples and culture, but also what it reveals to us about human nature and also about God, the unity and diversity and the mystery of the presence of God. One particular thing about culture is we always, I think, have to consider the role of the family and how cultures understand family and particular family roles and how they form community. And with that, of course, then leads to an understanding of how they understand God and God's both His transcendence and God's immanence.
Thank you. Dr. Robeck, your summary, please.
Yeah, I think that racism has played an enormous role here in terms of how we have treated, how we've spoken about Native Americans. It's led to all kinds of stereotyping. It's also led to false narratives about how they live and so forth. I do worry about the recovery of the history of these people in some ways. I remember when Dances with Wolves came out, there was a great deal of criticism of Dances with Wolves, of making them look too good. In reality, I've wondered at times about what they really contribute to culture at particular times, how they did in fact handle the environment. Would they be the kind of environmentalists we would want to follow today or not? So it's really a difficult time to try to recover the right thing. About all I get in Southern California is come to our casino and help us settle the fights about who's in and who's not in a tribe.
Wow, thank you. Reverend Plumbley, your summation, please.
Thank you. I think in this conversation about normalizing those who are different, about helping us to understand the common humanity that we share. I don't want to be heard to say that normalizing means homogenizing. Okay, I am just like you, but I also have a unique identity and a unique story. Both of those sentences are critically important, both as I'm meeting people that are much like me, who have the same skin tone that I do and who speak the same language as I do, but as I meet people who are very, very different than I.
All right, thank you very much. Rabbi Levin, your summation, please.
I think for so long, Americans have sought to erase Native cultures, that there is a huge lack of trust by Native American people of other Americans. My sister used to teach at the Pima Maricopa Reservation in Arizona, and she taught high school there, and it was a hard time getting students to even come to high school because they thought if they went to the high school, it would erase their Native culture. And so when you have programs like this that try to help us realize that Native Americans are more than mascots, that not only do we start to build a sense of appreciation and respect for those people, but as they see us do that, it will help us to rebuild the trust that will allow us to become really one nation.
All right, thank you very much. Canon Peterson, your summation.
Yes, Michael Piers, the Archbishop, sent an apology to the Native people in Canada. I am sorry, more than I can say, that we tried to remake you in our image, taking from you your language and your signs for your identity. I also know that I am in need of healing, and my own people are in need of healing, and our church is in need of healing. Without that healing, we will continue to have the same attitudes that have done so much damage in the past.
Well, thank you. And thank you, everyone, for being here today. This has been, I think, a very informative, insightful, and helpful, hopefully, meeting that we've had here around this table. So thank you so much. And thank you for tuning in. We hope that you've learned something of importance here. And we do love hearing from you. You have an opinion. You're not able to unless you just shout it at the TV, and that's kind of pointless, as you know, and frustrating. But you have a way of contacting us. You can write to us and let us know what you think about the program, perhaps what you heard today, or some other things you'd like to hear this panel discuss. There'll be many weeks ahead where we can take your topics into consideration. We hope we are able to get to them. For now, the Charter of the American Religious Town Hall provides that Roman Catholics, Protestants, Jews, educators, and others may appear on this program and can declare their beliefs without hesitancy, and the rest of the members of the panel will uphold and guarantee that American right to all who will appear, irrespective of race or creed, so that the rest of the world can see that here in America we believe in civil and religious freedom, not only in theory, but in reality. So now, friends, until next week at the same time and over the very same channel, the American Religious Town Hall meeting stands adjourned. And may the God of all of us bless all of you.
To